Normal is the biggest lie we ever agreed on. It sounds safe, comforting, even righteous, like a guarantee that if you stay within its lines, life will somehow make sense. But here's the truth. Normal doesn't exist. It never did. It's a moving target built by frightened minds trying to organize chaos. Everything we call normal was once considered dangerous, insane, or immoral. And everything that feels wrong today might just be the next normal waiting for permission to exist. Human history is basically a series of arguments over who gets to define sanity. Back in the 1800s, scientists tried to measure normal like it was math. Émile Durkheim studied suicide and crime not to fix them, but to find out what level of them society could tolerate before calling it abnormal. Francis Galton, the cousin of Charles Darwin, believed intelligence could be ranked, that some people were born superior and the rest were statistical noise. And Cesare Lombroso thought you could spot a criminal by the shape of their skull. These men weren't evil, they were obsessed with order. They wanted to map morality onto numbers, to turn human behavior into a chart. And that obsession still defines how we think today. When someone calls you normal, what they're really saying is you fit into a system that doesn't threaten anyone's comfort. And when they call you weird, what they mean is they remind them that their comfort is fragile. Normal isn't truth, it's emotional safety. It's a fence we build around the unpredictable parts of ourselves. Think about it. The so-called normal person wakes up, goes to work, pays bills, smiles when they're supposed to, and dies quietly, like a well-behaved machine. But that same pattern, repeated for decades, breeds mental exhaustion, quiet resentment, and invisible panic. Still, we call it healthy because it keeps the system running. If that's what we celebrate as normal, maybe sanity itself has been misdiagnosed. The pressure to be normal doesn't come from nature, it comes from fear. Fear of being isolated, fear of standing out, fear of being labeled too much or not enough. From school to work to relationships, we're taught to perform our identities, to shrink the parts of us that don't blend in, and little by little, that performance becomes who we think we are. You can see it everywhere. People edit their emotions like social media posts, trimming the edges, brightening the highlights, deleting the shadows. We call it self-control, but it's really self-erasure. We don't want to be real, we want to be acceptable. Talesverser, here's a strange truth. The more we chase normality, the more unstable we become. Because the human mind isn't designed for sameness, it's designed for variation. Our brains thrive on contrast, but society runs on predictability. So we trade authenticity for approval and call it being fine. That's why people can live entire lives that look perfect from the outside and still feel like they're falling apart inside. Because normal teaches us to perform stability, not to experience it. We pretend to be okay long enough that the act becomes our identity. And when it finally cracks, everyone says, "I never saw that coming." Of course they didn't. We only see what fits the template. If you go back far enough, every form of human difference was pathologized. Women who spoke too freely were diagnosed with hysteria. Left-handed children were forced to write with their right hand to correct their deviance. Homosexuality was listed as a mental disorder until 1973. Each time, society thought it was defending normalcy, but what it was really doing was punishing variance, the proof that human nature refuses to stay inside a box. Even medicine, which should have been neutral, became a moral tool. If you behaved outside the average, the system labeled you sick. If you obeyed it, you were declared sane. But health and obedience are not the same thing. One protects life, the other protects control. Let's make this personal. How many times have you hidden a part of yourself just to keep a relationship smooth? How many times have you pretended to agree to fit in, to stay likable? Each small act of conformity feels harmless until you realize you've built a personality around avoiding rejection. That's not normal. That's emotional survival disguised as self-discipline. There's a term psychologists use, normative conformity. It means changing your behavior to match others so you don't stand out. It's the foundation of social peace and also of collective delusion. Because when everyone agrees just to stay comfortable, no one's actually thinking anymore. We just mirror each other's fears and call it community. The funny part? The people we admire most, the ones who move culture forward, are almost always the ones called abnormal. They break patterns, they question rules, they refuse to perform politeness. They remind us that normal isn't a goal, it's a limitation. And that's why their existence feels both inspiring and threatening. They expose how small our version of okay really is. Normal is convenient, it's efficient, but it's also the reason innovation dies, emotions flatten, and people stop being curious about themselves. The moment you try to fit perfectly, you stop growing. Because growth requires friction, a mismatch between who you are and what you're told to be. Without that, you're just repeating life instead of living it. Talesverser, here's a secret that most people never learn. There's no universal scale for sanity. There's just statistical majority. What's called normal is just whatever most people happen to be doing at the same time. And majority doesn't mean correct, it just means common. That's why every era thinks it's normal until the next one calls it insane. People once thought lobotomies were progressive. They thought women shouldn't vote. They thought segregation was natural law. Each one of those ideas lived comfortably under the label normal. So how long before some of our current habits look just as barbaric? Maybe one day people will look back and say, they used to work themselves to death and called it ambition. Or they scrolled through other people's lives for hours and called it connection. They'll see our version of normal for what it really is, an anxious attempt to manage emptiness. Here's the paradox. Humans crave belonging, but belonging requires rules. Rules define normal. And once we build those rules, they start owning us. We end up policing ourselves for the illusion of acceptance. We stop asking, who am I, and start asking, am I still normal enough? That's how conformity replaces curiosity. It's how routine replaces identity. And it's why so many people confuse calmness with emptiness, because they've been told that chaos is wrong when, in fact, chaos is the birthplace of individuality. The human condition isn't meant to be balanced all the time. We're supposed to feel anger, confusion, obsession, desire, contradiction. Those emotions don't make you broken, they make you alive. What breaks you is pretending they don't exist. Every flaw, every impulsive reaction, every anxious thought you have, that's not a defect, it's data. It's your mind trying to make sense of a world that was never designed for emotional honesty. Normality teaches you to suppress that signal, but suppression is not sanity. It's just silence wearing a smile. Let's call things what they are. Normal is a performance. Sanity is a balance between honesty and control. And humanity, real humanity, is messy, contradictory, and always in motion. The closer you get to normal, the farther you drift from truth. There's no single version of human rightness. There are just different ways of surviving the same chaos. So when someone says you're not normal, take it as a compliment. It means you haven't traded your texture for symmetry. It means you still belong to yourself. Normal is the language of comfort, not of truth. And truth rarely feels comfortable. But it's the only thing that makes you real. So stop chasing normal. Start noticing what's real. Because the people who feel too much, question too deeply, and think too differently, they're not broken. They're the evidence that humanity still has a pulse. And if the world ever calls that insanity, maybe that's the only kind of sanity worth keeping. And that's a wrap, my dear friends. Thanks for hanging out with me. Until next time, stay awesome.